There you go. So thank you, everybody, and welcome to the ng-conf webinar. ng-conf, which is, as you know, like the biggest Angular conference in the world, and it's happening again this year in Utah. And that's going to be in June, I believe, 11, 12. That's the 12th to the 14th would be, the 12th and the 13th would be the workshops. And then the 13th, 14th, the Wednesday and Thursday will be the actual conference at the Little America in Utah. So if you haven't bought your ticket yet, man, you are going to be missing out. There's a crazy cool lineup. And then on top of like the regular talks, there's what we call the hallway conference, where you get to meet everybody from the Angular team, most people from the Angular team, a lot of people in the Angular community. So please, please, please make sure like that you participate. And for people who cannot fly to Utah, you have the option to come in online. So check out those options, but definitely don't miss it. And real quick though, since like this is an ng-conf session, the same rules that applies for the code of conduct, you know, at ng-conf will apply in this session right here. So please, at the end of the day, I summarize it in just like, be a nice human. At the end of the day, just be nice, be kind to people. If you have a question, go for it. We have the comment. And then we do have like the Q&A. So if you want Evan to respond to your question at the end of the session, make sure you put it in the Q&A. If you want to say hi, I'm right here. I'm going to be manning the comments. And just be nice, be respectful to each other, and then we'll take it from there. So today we do have Evan Payne. I hope like I'm not butchering your name, so tell me if I do. Yes, and Evan is based in Spain, and is some people might know him from like one cool app that he has that he's been manning for a little while, which is like if you are a Dungeon Master fan, you're really gonna love Evan. So like, you know, he has the Dungeon Mastery app. He'll talk about that. But he plays with like a lot of cool tools such as Nx, you know, Angular, of course. But there's this thing called tRPC that I've been hearing about lately, and seems to be like the thing that can connect both stacks as far as types are concerned. I'm not really sure if that's a great definition, but we will let the master himself, you know, tell us more about it. So Evan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adi. I appreciate the introduction. I realized that we didn't test out the screen sharing beforehand, so we might hit that hiccup where I have to quit Zoom and reopen it, because I never have to use Zoom, which is a pleasant thing, but you know, anyway.
When it happens, I have to sing a song in the meantime, so hopefully it doesn't happen. So go ahead. Let's try it
first and sort of.
Okay.
I also want to set the stage a bit for you to sort of pique everyone's interest. So yeah, I have worked with Angular for quite a while. I'm a principal front-end software engineer at a European-based consultancy called Cognizant and Eccentric, and I've been working with Angular in particular for a while. And over the years, I've gotten more and more into just doing it all myself. Right, Angular is the batteries included framework, and it is quite nice for you know, there's one way to do things most of the time. If it works, you've done it the right way. People can be intimidated by it, but for me, it was a great place to learn and grow. And I did so much so that I built a side project, which is called Dungeon Mastery, specifically for the notes that we would have when we were playing our D&D sessions, role-playing sessions. And you know, I built this up from scratch over the course of a lazy year, and released it live. It's going strong. It's helping people out, and it's been a really nice experience. Over the period of time, though, I've gotten more into the full stack side of things, and thankfully, I found a tool called tRPC. tRPC is, in a nutshell, it is a router. And it doesn't sound very exciting, and that's because it is really very simple. I'll explain once we get into things, but really what it is you allow your development process to have some constraints in exchange for a lot of benefits. So those constraints are that you should be using a monorepo if you use this approach. and you actually do want your front end and your back end to be relatively tightly coupled. Now, a lot of times those are said as bad things, right? You've been taught modularity, you've been taught encapsulation, and your front end and your back end are separate things entirely, and they shouldn't be hand in hand. But with tRPC, that kind of goes out the window because you get these benefits, and we'll see that as we walk through them. I am going to try and share my screen now, and like I said, I might have to quit and rejoin, but let's try it. Desktop 1, share. Okay. No, can you see things? Is it working? Hey, look at us. Okay.
Yep. All right, we're going to get out of your way and leave you with the stage. We'll be in the back, okay?
Brilliant. Thanks for that. I will also shrink these down. Okay, so I have a link here that we can send to the group at some stage. A friend of mine, Chris Sev, has built this thing called DevTree. I just tossed together a quick one for myself. Like I said, I work for Cognizant NetCentric. I am on Twitter, not too frequently. I built a thing called Dungeon Mastery. And though I'm on GitHub, I don't really use it on my day-to-day work, so not that much there. Okay, tRPC builds themselves as move fast and break nothing, end-to-end type-safe APIs. And they have nice little demos on here. It's pretty easy to get started. As with many things in the modern day world, when you start to dive into their docs or their quick start, even the example apps, you'll pretty quickly see there's a lot of React-based stuff. There's a lot of Next.js stuff. There's Svelte even that's there. But guess what? There's not much Angular. That's been a perpetual problem throughout the time that we've been working on Angular, I've found. It is what it is. But that means that you end up having to do a lot of these things yourself, sort of figure out how they piece together. I'm going to start us off. I want to show you how this works. I hope that I don't go too fast for things. I have a repository here that I will maybe paste into the chat or whatnot. It's pretty straightforward. We're going to work on this thing. It's called a rankle. So it is a ranking mechanism. All right. Well, fingers crossed that it's not too slow. Okay, we were talking about tRPC, and I do think we should just dive into this. So what I'm going to do, what I would have done on the command line to get us started is I would have run the command for, npx create nx workspace at latest and preset Angular Monorepo. So the reason that I'm leveraging NX for this is that it is so much easier to work within a monorepo when you have full control over your front end and your back end. There's a whole bunch of things that just speed up your process. If you're not having to pull in a bunch of external libraries, if you're not having to bounce between projects, if it's all in one place, you start to have much better control over what you're working on. So I would run this command on my mobile connection right now. I'm not going to do that. Instead, we're going to be working off of this repo that I showed you earlier. I will paste that in the chat as well, just so you can follow along. If I can find the chat. Oh no, chat here, paste, go. The idea being that I've created a number of branches for each step along the way. And each step would be after we finished doing what we're doing, then we would be on that step. So I'm going to start by going to step 0. I should already be on that. I'll check that out. If you are wanting to follow along and do this, the first thing we would have done was spin up that monorepo, and I'll open up the repository we have here now. So what you'll see is we're using Angular 15.2. Maybe not quite the latest, but not necessarily that important for what we're going to work on today. What we created just as part of the setup script was one Angular application called rankle FE. And now we're going to move this over out of my way again. Just close this. We're going to make sure that we have installed the NX console, because I don't know about the rest of you, but sometimes I struggle to remember, even with a nice terminal like Warp, to remember the commands for all of the libraries and things that I do. I do want to use generators. I do want to install stuff. So as part of the repo, there is the recommended extensions. Narwhal makes this thing called the Angular console. Highly recommend that. Once you have that installed, it appears here in your sidebar. And refresh this because it's cached the old stuff. Yeah, well, it's cached. Very nice caching stuff. What we need to do here is scroll down to the bottom of the common NX commands. And this screen is very small, or at the zoomed in stage. Oh, come on. Try and make you bigger. Just bring it up here. And we want to do this thing called add dependency. What we're going to search for in here is Express, and Narwhal has an Express package. So what we're doing right now as this initial step is we're creating our backend for our application. So we're going to hit Narwhal Express, and this also might be a little slow on the network, so I might need to also jump us ahead. Oh, it's so frustrating. What I find this tiny bit confusing, feedback for the team if they're listening, but what you can do is hit latest here to install a specific version. What that is, I'm not going to click that. I'm very paranoid about the network right now. So what that's going to do under the hood, though, is install the requirements that you need in your package.json. And that isn't very much, but it is. I'm going to check out step 1 just so I can show you what it is. That is installing the Narwhal Express, and I believe it also installs Node if you didn't already have it installed, the types for some things, and make sure that you have TS Node installed as well. So the reason we want that is because we also want to use the Nx console after that is in place to generate this Express app. So this one should work fine. I switched these around. Generate should be on the top. I'm going to hit generate here. Pop up another one of these. This time I'm going to look for Express, and one of the generators that's available is the Express application. And open that up. We're going to type Rankle BE, so for our backend. Yeah, the Nx thing is cached. I can delete that really quickly. Oh wait, no, it already exists because I switched over to step 1 branch. This generator is nice because let's just say BE2 or something like that. It gives you a preview as you're going of what you're building. So it's going to say, I'm going to create this app. You know, it's going to set up all the configuration the way it is. We'll have an end-to-end suite as well. And we run from there. I will run that. I would run that if I were had not already done so on this branch. And that would in turn give me an Express app that lives here. And it comes with sort of a default thing we can spin up and check. Okay, and get that out of the way. The other thing that I do in step 0 that I want us to do is to generate a library. I also, if you are following along and running these things yourself, I have removed the end-to-end ones that come along with this that are automatically generated, just so as not to confuse matters as we're going through the details here. But the last command we'll run as part of our setup is we want to generate a JavaScript library. This is something that can be reused by both the backend and the front end. So you could generate an Angular library, but that is geared towards being included in Angular. When we want a library for helping us out, we would do this in the JavaScript. I'm not sure people's levels of experience here, but and I don't want to go too much into the details of app versus library, but the app is the thing that you build, and it imports or uses things from the libraries. And in an Nx Monorepo, the best practice is that you want very thin, lightweight applications and a bunch of libraries. The reason that this is nice is because the apps that you build are, and Nx will help you figure out what their dependencies are through the import statements because you're using TypeScript. And then you have a lot better time of caching your build and making sure you don't run things multiple times. Other people have given better talks on this. I've given a talk on it in the past, but this library setup can be a little bit confusing, but suffice to say, it's a piece of reusable. It's a reusable thing within our monorepo. So what I would fill in here, I want to create a JavaScript library. We're going to call this Rankle Core. This one already exists in this case, but and I'm skipping all the testing and stuff. You don't have to, it's there. It's bundled with TypeScript. I like to place this in a backend directory because we are specifically making this for the backend. So this would be libs backend Rankle core. And this is going to be where we write all the actual code for our backend. So the Express app is going to live there, but the backend actually is there. And I know that I'm breezing over this. This isn't the most important part. This setup literally will take, this 15 minutes that we take to do it now, and you won't really have to worry about it again. Instead, it gets out of your way and you just get to coding. And more importantly as well, in this GitHub repo where we're pasting these steps, you could just borrow this approach if you want, and then you kind of have it for yourself out of the box. So again, not going to run this because we're already in that branch where it's been run. Instead, let's just take a quick look at what that generated. So here in the libs, we have the backend and we have this core project. And inside here, then we just have a generic function that could be used. And again, if we were to want to use this somewhere else, at the root of the project, what Nx has done for us is it's created an alias. So for this barrel file that we have here at the Rankle core .index, anything exported from there can be imported via this elsewhere in the whole monorepo. It's a great pattern. That's the extent of what is in step 1. So we should move on to step 2 now. And this is where we're going to start to use tRPC itself. So what I would do at this stage, and again, because of the npm script install part, this might work though, because I should have it installed. I didn't delete node modules. Let's give it a try. So I'm going to do an npm install and save it of @trpc/client, @trpc/server, as well as cores and super.json. These last two aren't strictly necessary, but they are helpful for having it work the way you want to. You'll see how they work. They're not confusing. They're too confusing. They don't require much from you. The biggest things we're working here is client and server. So I'm going to hit install on that. So it's here, and we'll see if everything falls apart on the network. No, good. I hope that would happen. Good. Caching for the win. So with those installed, we're going to start to actually build up our tRPC router. So the way that this is going to work is in this Rankle core library. I'm going to rename this file here from the generic one that Nx generated to router.ts. And I'm going to add a file next to it that is context.ts. This concept of router and context, those are two things that they're kind of the only two things that you need to know to get started with tRPC. For context, we're using an Express application here, but we don't have to be using one. In fact, what we on projects that I've worked on for clients, we've used AWS Lambdas. We've used had to build our own handler for this, but we've used Azure Cloud Functions as well. They have a number of these, which is why it supports Next.js out of the box as well. I go to context here. What you do is you'll need to create a context. We'll see exactly how that comes into play later. And then you need to initialize your tRPC. That context is something that you will feed in. And so it is what knows about your actual backend. So the backend itself, like tRPC isn't reinventing the wheel. It's using whatever you have that already handles incoming HTTP requests and connections. So we have an Express application we've added here specifically for this. We're going to tell that Express route that is our API. We're going to tell it to use tRPC to handle anything that comes in. And that's the basics of it. An request comes from our front end, goes into our Express app. The Express app basically does nothing but hands it off to tRPC from that stage. So in our context, we're going to create context, which we will use when we bootstrap this. And we're just returning whatever we want. This is context that gets passed into the rest of the application. But it's important because from your events that come into your Express app, you have things like the headers. So in the request headers, you might have, test, or usually you'll see something like xtest or whatnot. So we're going to then send this along to the rest of our backend application with either the header that's there or this string of empty. Then we have the type of context. The way tRPC really works is it's using TypeScript magic under the hood. So we have a type of that, which is inferring whatever this would return. So if you hover over this, you'll see it's that test string. And then finally, we get to the meat of this, which is I'm going to build up tRPC for my use case. So this exporting a const is T, just for shorthand. You use init tRPC from the server. You say .context. You don't need to add anything here, but this gets the types from here. So this says, I want to use the context that I will be run from, and I want to create this application. So it doesn't seem to do much. It's only slightly type aware for now. But the other missing piece that we have to add here is the router. I promise this will click. It seems like a lot because it's a whole bunch of new stuff all at once, but this file and this file are all that you need. So in this router file, I need to check out the correct branch for this. Sorry. I'll go here. I have this copied and pasted, but I don't have it in front of me. Let's do step 2. No, of course, it's going to throw that at me. Okay. I'm going to open up a new window. Code, tilde. Bear with me. I do apologize. No, come on. Okay, scratch that. I'll make it up as I go. So, I had such a simple one. Okay, I can copy and paste this a little bit. Here we go, back into it. Here. Okay, in our router, what we're going to do is we're going to export an app router. That's the important thing, along with the type of the router. This type is a very important thing to have as well. Okay. So first we need to import T. So we import T from the context file. That gives us the tRPC instance to work off of. The app router will use this t.router function that we have. And inside that object, you pass through the routes that you would have. So in our particular case, we're going to create a single route just to start with that is called hello. It will use a procedure, which we'll explain more once we get into some of the meat of this, to query something, and it will return a string which has this context. Then feels like magic. You get really used to it really quickly. Once that is done, this needs to be a comma. We then are exporting the type of this router that we've created. So this is, you see here that there is hello, and it has a build procedure query. This is not very useful to you as a human. It's okay, I guess, but I find that you never really look at this. The magic is what you can do if this is available within your monorepo. Okay, the last thing we have to do is export this. We have from the router already. It auto-completed that from us, but in this barrel file in our library, we need to export the context. With both of those in place, we can go to our Express app, and we're going to actually try and get something practical in place here. So if I go, I'm going to copy and paste some stuff. Let's walk through this Express app really quickly. So when we run this file from Node, we will we'll have an Express app. We will use an assets path. This is something you need to do if you have assets. Again, it comes out of the box for us. Maybe we don't even need this. What it has done is provided us an API route. So if you hit wherever this is being served from /API, it'll respond with this. You set a port, and then you create a server. So you say app.listen with this port, and you console log any requests that come in. Because we've already said app.get, if you hit this localhost/3333/API, it will do this message. We're going to change that slightly, and I'll paste in what we're going to change it to. So we still have the Express app that's here. We're going to use cores just because that does come up pretty quickly once you start working with wanting to read the headers and trying stuff online. You really want to secure your cross-origin stuff so no one can take advantage of what you're building. We're specifically saying no problem handling requests that are coming from localhost 4200, which is going to be where our Angular app is being served from. Then we have a kind of a middleware logger that we added in. Again, not super important. We don't need that, but it helps. And this is where we're integrating tRPC. So this app use/API that we had before, we're now going to pass in a handler to it. So Express in particular, and whatever else you might use that's not Express or something else, they generally have handlers where you can take this over. So we're saying we want to use this tRPC Express that we get from the tRPC server adapters and create an Express middleware with a router and a create context. So the router is what we defined earlier, this app router that came from our library, and create context is passed in here, same as it was before, from our library. So again, if I jump through to that, you'll see I'm in the library with the router. And if I go back to the backend main, we have that there. This is kind of all that's needed. And this would be the last that you would touch this Express file unless you wanted to change sort of like the logging requests, or maybe add something that isn't the API, but is a different thing entirely to handle something else. But for our use cases, we've now created our API route on this. And we can check this by going to our package.json, and let's add a script for ourselves. I usually like to do dev BE for the backend, and this will be Nx run. What are we calling ourselves? Rankle BE. Rankle BE serve. So now if I go over to my terminal and run npm run dev BE, that will run the serve command, run the Express app, and it'll be listening at localhost 3333/API. If I open that up in the browser, you'll see, oh, there's no query procedure. That's great. That already means it's working. And if I went to /hello, I should see something. Oh, I mistyped that. I would see the response with the JSON of hello, test header, empty. Okay, that was a lot. I actually have no idea if everything is still going well or not, or if things have crashed again. Seems to be working. I still see green from Zoom. This part, I know that it can be a lot all at once, but I hope that you can see anyway the relative simplicity of it. I mean, we've only touched a couple of files here. All right, we created our router and context with very minimal information to just sort of give ourselves a tRPC router to work within. We have set up an Express app also with some Nx commands to run, and we wired them up together so that we can actually serve it and run it. Let me take a pause here just to check the chat and see if there's any other questions. And if there's still time remaining, which I think we still have enough, I would really love to just get into the next step and start to show how we wire this up to a real Angular application.
Nice. So, yeah, I think like people were just like mesmerized by the walkthrough. I think you're doing a very good job there. So yeah, nothing to worry about as far as the internet connection. It's been very good.
Good.
So touch on wood.
Feedback. Yeah, knock wood. Okay, let's go on to then step 2 here. So a lot of stuff is going to happen here. And again, I'm aware that if you're not building stuff with Angular on a daily basis, this might be a lot. And if you are, this might be too simple. So, hey, welcome to development world. It's a little bit of both. What I'm going to do is, again, use the NX console here. And just to make sure, I'm going to check out step 2. Let me discard these changes. And we're going to GCO tutorial step 2. Okay, that should put us at the same place. We've got the backend script. We've installed the things we need. So for this, I'm going to generate a library that we can use inside our Angular app. So backend, we're not going to touch this again. The Express app is done. It's ready to go. We will do all of our work either inside the router or inside the Angular app here. But first, we need something that will let the Angular app use it. So I would want to do a quick shout out here, which is to this project here that's called Spartan by Robin Gertz. Spartan is a really cool name and a cool base for things. This is an example application to run on Supabase, which I love for the database, Postgres database, Prisma for kind of getting your types out of your database and making sure that you know what you have. Analog, which Brandon Roberts from the community has worked on and is a kind of his answer to SvelteKit or Next.js, I guess, and tRPC, as well as Tailwind, Angular, and Nx. With the exception of Prisma and Analog, which I just really haven't tried yet, this is my stack, and I love it, and it's great. I didn't have the time to go through specifically what Robin has done, and I know that what I guess Daphnic has done on NGX tRPC to specifically provide more modern versions of this. So if you were doing it with the latest Angular stuff, with all standalone, you would actually integrate it by creating something that you can inject throughout your application. I'm not going to show the example right now. I did get that to work, but I thought it might just be a little confusing because it's, I think most of us won't have switched in our minds from having services that we kind of export as modules and then we provide to the app as providers to actually creating these sort of standalone, injectable things. So I didn't want to mess with that. But that approach is out there, super valid, and I would guess that it will make the whole tRPC thing a lot easier as well, because it'll abstract away basically the step that we just did. Okay, but let's start in on this. Let's run in Nx. We're going to generate a Angular application, or a library in this case, because we do want this to be used by Angular. I tend to like to put this in a folder called Frontend Utils. We're going to name this client, so the API client, and we're going to put this in our libs inside a folder called Frontend, and I also like to put it inside Utils. So in case I have components, I don't want to have like all of my components that I like doing them standalone. I don't want to have them next to the API client, but the API client also doesn't really belong on its own. So a lib inside these two folders makes sense from my way of doing things. You can totally change that if you like. So I'm going to build this. I'm also just, again, to clean up some space here a little bit, not have too many files. I like to, scroll down through the settings and maybe like double check them. Specifically, I'm looking to just skip tests. So I don't have those and I don't have to delete them later. But I'll run that. It'll generate the lib that we want. And if I go and look in our libs now, we have our tRPC router, our backend, and then we have a API client, which is what we're going to build out next for use in our front end. We're more or less going to throw this part away. And let me close that again. First, we need to clean up this and rename some files here. So this file that we're working on here, we're just going to rename it to API client .service. And we're going to double check that our barrel export that's here is correctly exporting whatever we have in here. And then we're going to convert this to a service. So I'm going to copy and paste again, and we'll walk through the code here. I say that. Sorry. Fingers are on the wrong part of the keyboard. Okay. So what we're doing here is we're creating an injectable service that's called API client service. The way that I've done it is have one of its properties, one of its members, is set inside the constructor, essentially. So when the class is created, it will create tRPC proxy client. So this is something that comes from tRPC's client. This happens when you load your front-end application. It will create this proxy client. And then you can use this API client to make calls to your backend service. So in order for that to happen, you need to configure it. What we're doing here, this transformer, we have that on the backend side too. What this does is it just makes sure that if you are sending a JSON object or like dates, it will, before it sends it, turn it into a string with JSON.stringify, and when it arrives in the backend on the node sign, it'll turn it back into an object or a date. Then you don't have to write those transformations manually. I'm sure there's limitations. I'm sure it balloons the file size, but for me, it's been worth it to add that in right away. The important thing of this router that we're creating, this proxy client we're creating, however, is specifying a link. They have different link types, and you can handle different things. I think that most of the time, this HTTP batch link is the best one to use. There also is just HTTP link. But what batch link does is if multiple calls are happening at the same time, it'll just put them together for you. So if you had an application that was calling, like when it loaded, for endpoints, which hopefully you could get around, but let's say you had to, it would actually just make a single API call to this router, to this single endpoint, because that's actually what's happening here. It's not like you're hitting 4 different endpoints, even though it might feel that way. You're hitting one endpoint, and then you have 4 different handler functions inside there. So it's able to do this magical batching for you. I'm also added something here. So I've added the URL to this port that we're running at, this same one here. Eventually, maybe this is a shared constant, or it comes from your environment files. Not for now, didn't want to confuse matters. And I also added these headers. So when each time a link is called, we check the headers, and you can update this with parts of your state if you wanted to. It could be something that changes like after they log in, and they have the cookie, or they have the client-side secret or something like that. You could pass that through the HTTP headers. So in this case, we're saying we have that header we wanted to have as test. We're going to pass through header from FE. And so every time this is sent, we will call these, send these headers along for the ride with this. So that's all this service does. Right? It just exports this API client that we can use in our application. So let's save that and let's go use it in our application. Oh boy, I've got too many windows open as usual. Bear with me. Yeah, let's clean up our front-end application a little bit here. This one back up here. So there's a lot of stuff that we're not really using. We don't really need this lovely, and I'm sure painstakingly designed NX welcome component. In fact, the app component, we don't really need too much here at all. I'm going to replace this instead with again, I didn't copy and paste the stuff I needed to. I'll probably check out the route and show you what we're building here. But yeah, we're not going to use this. We will leave the router module because we might use it later. But what we would want to do here in this app component is use the constructor, and we would say private, what do we call this, API client service is our API client service. So you can see Nx has helped us. We're importing it from that front-end utils API client. We have that here now. That's here in our constructor. And we want to call this hello route. So I'm going to do this on ng-init. We'll add this implements on init from Angular core. And we'll say ng on init is void. And when we init, we want to run this. Let's put it into its own function just in case. Let's just say call API. I don't know what else we should call it. And then when the app bootstraps, we'll call API. The reason I'm abstracting this away here is in case we need to call it a second time, it's already off on its own. So this is the Angular version of like this technically is an async function that we should await, be able to await if you've dealt with that before. So what we will do is we will either return or we will await a response of some kind. we're going to do this dot API client service. Now, here's the proof. This is what I was building to this whole time. If I hit dot here, I get the API client, sure. If I hit dot here, I get hello. Notice I have not anywhere in my types or anything like that said that there was a route here. It knows that there is a route called hello here, which in order to call, you have to do query. It knows that that is the case because of the way tRPC works. Let's examine really quickly how that is. So if I go to the client service and look at this, we have created this proxy client, but we've given it a type. We passed in this generic in TypeScript to give it a type of the app router that we have created in our core. And if we bounce to that, we can see, remember back in our router in the main tRPC part of the application, we exported this type of app router. So this isn't human readable, or it's human readable. It's not perfection, but what it does give us is that our whole code base knows what our routes are, what is available. And under the hood, tRPC knows that if we were to extend this to take certain inputs, to make it a mutation instead of a query, it would absolutely be able to infer that, and you wouldn't even have to type out what types it would take in. It will provide those for you. But let's finish wiring this up and let's see how it looks. So what we want is to display this in our front end. So we need to set this onto some kind of variable. What I'm going to do really quickly is just, and this is hilarious to do it this way, I'm going to discard all these changes we just did, and I'm going to check out step 3. So at the end of step 2, we should get to this stage, very close to what we had before. Oh, wait, don't save that, and don't save that. Let's go back to the app component now. So I added a behavior subject here for the response. I love using behavior subjects. RxJS is one of my favorite parts of using Angular. I renamed this to fetch data, but same concept. When the app component loads for the first time, and when it bootstraps, we'll fetch the data. We will fetch this API client hello query, and whatever comes back, we will pass through to this behavior subject as the next example. And then in the app component, we're just using the async pipe to display this. One quick thing, if you're following along, you'll notice that I did as well was in the providers, I added this service, and I didn't do it on the whole application level, which we could, but I just provided it here for the time being. And I also had to make sure that the common module was added here so that we could use the async pipe. Okay, with that though, that's, I think, all the other changes I did. So what we can do is also add an alias for our front end, so we can run our front end. So same as before, we're aliasing it to nx run rankle fe serve. And then what I like to do is split my terminal. You can do an nx run many command, but oftentimes I find you want to stop one or the other, but not stop both. So over here, I would do npm run backend, and over here I would do npm run dev fe. So on the left, we have the Express app running with our listener setup for close 333/API. And on the right, we have our regular Angular application, which if we now load in the browser, we can see is already working. The magic is too fast. But let's look at this network call that happened. So we load the page, we run the pre-flight check for cores, and then we run this initial call. Let me zoom in a bit here so you can maybe read it. Oh, can't see that there. So the request itself is a little bit hard to read, but you can see that this API / hello batch equals 1 input blah blah blah, and this JSON stringified value. This is the magic that it's doing for the batch request, but in the response itself that comes back through, we see that it has a result, it has this data, and it has the JSON response of hello test header from Fefi. And what I love about this too is like, this is all correct. This is good to pass your data back and forth between your front end and the back end that way. But I neither had to write that on my back end or my front end. I didn't have to send an array of results, figure out the whole batching setup inside the results, do data and JSON so that it could be correctly parsed. All I had to do was in my front end application, I made a call and I took the response, which it correctly understood was a string, displayed it on my front end. And in my back end, which because of TypeScript, I can get to by hovering and clicking on hello, it bounces me to the router file, and I'm right here at the correct procedure. In here, I only had to worry about returning a string. I didn't even have to write this promise string as the output. It would correctly infer that that is a string when I got back to my front end. And if I were to change this, this is always the one they do. If I were to change this to a number and go back to my front end, this would be mad at me because now res is a number, and I would need to then change this to a number in order for it to be happy with that. So you're writing less types as a result because everyone knows exactly what types are being passed around. And this is happening at like, it's not even at runtime, like it's happening at dev time, right? This is all happening via the TypeScript language service in the background. Okay, that is also a lot, but for me, that was where it started to click together when I was using this. This was the magic moment that really made it click and made me think, oh, okay, this is something that I very much want to use as we go forward. So the last thing I want to show, and I'm going to really skip forward for this one, so don't worry too much if it is. I'm not going to do the live coding part anymore. Let's just say that. Let me close these as well. What I've done in these branches, I've added Tailwind because I really like Tailwind. I've built the beginnings and changed the app slightly as well. So in the application now, we have the app component, but it is just the router outlet. And in the router module, we now have a home component and a route called rankings. Inside the home component, there's a button to go to the rankings. We might add something here later, but for now, inside the rankings component, we're going to fetch a pair of images, display them next to each other, and then at some stage, we want to be able to select that pair. All of this is for this repo and this demo is being done in memory, but it is giving you an idea of what needs to be done for both the GET requests that you're used to doing, as well as the POST requests. So we want something that is fetching data from the server, and we want something that pushes data back up to the server. So let's spin this up really quick, and I'll show you what it is before we then dive into how it works and what you might need to do. Oh, what happened? Why? Let me change that. Yes. Okay, well, let's just see. Oh no, everything is falling apart. Why did I not commit something that should have been committed? I thought this was all saved. Oh, this is odd. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, let's install this in the background and I'll check the chat. Maybe this will work. Ah, that works. Yeah, so I also have avoided going into Zod. Zod is super important. If you haven't heard of it, it is a bit of a paradigm shift. And I'll show you an example. For me, that was one of the harder things to wrap my head around. But now this is all working again. Let's actually dive into this. We're back in our app router. We still have our hello that's there. That's all good. The first thing we want is to get a random pair. So if I go to our front end, here we have the start ranking. If I go here, it fetches 2 images that I generated with Midjourney. Like I said, really into these things. Oh, look at that slow network. I'm gonna wait for them to load just in case my network connection slows while the images are loading. Oh, that is wildly slow. Oh, my home router's still not back yet. Okay, we'll get there. Come on. Okay, I'm gonna stop it there. The idea would be you'd have one of these images. When you decide that this one you like a little bit better than this one, you would click on that image, it would send a post request. There would be some rankings that we update in the database, and then you would get another pair. that you can rank against each other. And the idea is, as you rank hundreds and hundreds over time, those rankings get adjusted, and then you begin to see some sort of order emerge of what is preferable, what you like more. Basic thing that we're building here. So starting with the first one, give me those two random images. How do we do that? So coming back to the front end really quickly, inside the rankings component, we click on this button to fetch next pair. That fetch next pair is going to call to our API client this random pair endpoint that we have, and then it'll get back hopefully an array of images, hopefully 2 images, and pass those into this behavior subject, which is what we're rendering. So how does this actually work? Let's command click on random pair, and we're in our Rankle core router again. So this, as we saw with the hello procedure, is a t.procedure. It is a query. Doesn't have any inputs. We're not using the context right now. It will return a random response. In this case, I glazing over this, but I just wanted to show this is where you would do your API calls. If you had something else, is where you would do your databases calls. If you're using Supabase or something, I have for now just hard coded directly these 2 images that we have here, and I've also created a second table on our database for the rankings, which is starting with each of those images and mapping them to an object that has the default rating of 1200, capture time, and ID, just so we can start from there. So that's fine. That returns exactly what it is. No big deal there. But what happens when you've then chosen one? So back on your front end, excuse me, you pick one, and it needs to select one of those. So this is where a mutation comes into play. The interesting thing is, even though tRPC has the 2 types, so it has a random query, which you would use for GET requests, and a mutate, which works for post, put, delete requests. Those are really only by convention. You could very happily just use query for your mutations as well. This is just a way to signal to your front end that you're doing something that's potentially modifying data. That's the way that I like to think of it. But in practice, they work exactly the same. So if I go here to rank pair, you can see it's just a t.procedure, and I'm using an input now. So we need to take some values. So you saw on our front end component here, we are passing through an object which has image A, image B, and the winner between the 2 that we're doing. So we pass the ID of the first image, the ID of the second image, and the winner. Because the backend doesn't know anything about what the user is doing. There's one backend and 1,000 users, right? So you need to be very specific. But for this input, we take in essentially a validator. So this is, you would normally, I think, you would say, oh, I'm going to take in some object and it's going to have this type. This was the learning curve for me, where you're using Zod. Zod, which we're importing as Z from Zod, creates a, oh boy, the word is escaping me. Starts with a schema. Creates a schema that you define, and then you infer types from that schema. So essentially what we're saying is, I want you to validate when something comes into this procedure, that it is an object which has the property of image A, which is a string, and image B, which is a string, and winner, which is either A or B. And if it's not in that format, this should throw an error because you've broken the contract of what your backend expects. So this is how it generates the type safety. Once you have this chain in place of .procedure.input, you can then do .mutation or .query, and this input on the callback that the mutation has will be correctly typed to what was validated here. So if I change this to like image C, let's say, this will go wrong, but you can see that the input here that's coming in now has image C. So this is where you define what the type of your input is. And it feels uncomfortable at first because you're used to saying, I would like this to be, you might come up here and say, oh, I have a type of response, and define your interface or your type here. And then validate this property as that. But this isn't how it works. And I've come to like it over time because it kind of gives you the error handling for free if someone has incorrectly called the API endpoint. Okay, just really quickly finish this. We're just doing a direct mutation. We find the index from the initial quote database. We calculate, I created with ChatGPT's help some ELO probability method helper that's there in the repo, but we basically pass each of the images in the winner and it will update them accordingly. And I console log this from the backend just so you can see that working. And then we just return success of true. And you can see that even though I did type this response as having a success as a Boolean and error as any, which is good when you're dealing with database, you want to have consistency there. We're not really making much use of that here. There's no database calls. There's no second party calls to work with. We're just mutating the object and going back. This object, by the way, as long as the application is running, is in memory. And so we can safely overwrite it and continue to see rankings. Let's give this a try then. So on our front end here, I'm going to choose this one on the right. If I now look at our console logs here, I see that we hit ranked pair. So first we hit random pair, now I hit ranked pair, and it's going to log the two images. So now they were both 1200. Now the one on the right, the second one, is 1216. The one on the left, 1184. If I hit that a second time, even though I shouldn't, but sure, I can, you'll see that the one on the left went down, the one on the right went up even more. So that's great. That means it's working. It's really nice. Like I said before, I want to go to some Q&A now, and I'm not totally sure of how much time we have. All of this stuff that we've gone through is available in the repo. The branches are broken into tutorials. I added a step 3A just to add Tailwind, in case that is something you haven't done in a monorepo before. And step 3B kind of makes things a little more complex. I will, at some stage, probably later tonight, merge everything from the final step into the main repo so that people that are coming later can browse it. So with that, thank you for bearing with me. I know that's a bit of a whirlwind. I'll leave up the screen sharing as I start to answer some questions.
Wow, man, super awesome. And the fact that you even have the steps and everything in the repo, kudos to you, because me, I'm one of the offenders. I do a lot of live coding, but I never have a repo afterwards. So thank you for doing that. And looking forward to going and playing with it myself. But we do have a few questions here. I'll take the one from the Q&A first from Jacob. And I think we have some in the comment. And the question was, and I think time-wise, we have about maybe 5-10 minutes. Gene, let me know how much longer we can go. But the first question is, can you use HTTP client instead for any API request with tRPC?
I thought of that at the start. So do you mean the Angular HTTP client, I would guess?
Yes.
Yeah, I did think of that. I did look into that when I was first playing around with this, and I discovered that I didn't really need it once I got tRPC set up. They certainly can go alongside of each other, right? This app client that we created, or the API client that we created, this service, there we go. This here is only intercepting requests when you use it, right? So it's not like the HTTP interceptors that can be added to the client to do so. But in actual practice, I found I didn't need, once I started using this was my backend. This is everything I called. And if I were calling a third-party service, I actually am routing it through the backend portion of that now because it's better for the end user. If I need to do something that triggers like a call to, I don't know, let's say it was like the Pokemon API or like a third-party service, right? I wouldn't do that from my front end anymore. I would say I would create a route for it, or I would just call it directly from one of my other routes, wait for it to come back and send it back to the front end. So I'd say they play well alongside, but I would say that once you start using tRPC in this way, you wouldn't really need to use HTTP client on the front end anymore.
All right. I mean, I will have a kind of follow-up on that when we look at the use case of having some edge cases and things where, for example, HTTP client being de facto unobservable and being able to attach it to an observable chain and things like switch map, concat map. When we have like some of those edge cases, promises usually don't really like, kind of cater to that type of like scenario. Any maybe a couple words around that type of use
Yeah,
cases?
it's interesting. I'm gonna show something that maybe I shouldn't, but I don't mind. This is not open source, but it's also like, not really that big of a deal if I share it. I've been doing it before. Let me see, what am I trying to think of here? So this is my side project, Dungeon Mastery, which is a much larger app that is using in the refactored version tRPC, but it also, it's using NGRX. And what I found with NGRX is you end up, again, I have a very thin app module, and somewhere here in, where is it, Mastery? Yeah, I have my service, right? So the side effects, like, my effects has all these observables. I'm subscribing to them, to the store, like the state in the components, and all of that. But the state is all being managed, at this sort of higher level. And the only thing that's allowed to make HTTP calls within my application is the effects file and the service that it calls, right? So if I wanted to, delete a record here, I have to actually, I can fire the action that says to do it, but the thing that actually uses the HTTP service under the hood would be this service that's here. And the thing I found is, especially as I was integrating it with Supabase, I kind of just stopped wanting to do that on the front end. And so I call the Supabase service, but it really is just the API service. And I'm using tRPC here, sending that off to the backend. And I am using async await here. The thing, though, is that let's do a search for this, create campaign in one of the effects files here. I end up just transforming this using from a promise into an observable, because it's only ever going to be here. It's not like I have from all over the code base. When I use this RxJS from, which is taking a promise, from RxJS, it takes a promise and turns it into observable, basically. I'd say 98, 99% of the time, these API calls I make once, and yes, they're asynchronous, I have to wait, but they have one response. They're not a stream, right? So for me, that is totally fine to then use from in order to turn this async way, which it is a bit cleaner than trying to convert them in line here. That's what I erred on. I hope that's helpful. I hope you follow me.
No, it is very helpful. I mean, like, it's not adverse to it. They can work alongside. I think like that's what we can retain from that. So yeah, and I like that you already even had like an example of an actual live project that is doing both. So that's pretty cool. Or like yeah. So I think the other questions I will go to. Let's see. Don't forget that scrolled up. Is there a solution? Yeah. So there's one that like, is there a solution to overfetching in tRPC? Can queries across component be composed together into a single network request on the front end?
Yeah. So that's what I was showing with this batch link here. I don't know if you
exactly. Yeah.
Showcase that. But no, for me, that's wonderful. That was a great discovery. I've really enjoyed that. The project we're building at work that's using this, so not a side project, so I won't show you the code for it, but it is really making use of this. We have actually decoupled front ends. So I wouldn't say it's micro front ends, right? But we have multiple svelte components that can be loaded independently. Once they load, whichever one gets there first will call to an orchestration layer, like a proxy object that we've created, this JavaScript file, which is making use of native modules finally. It calls to that, and then that one has the router that's there, which means that they all do share this router, even though they don't know it. The individual components think they're just using a client, but it's essentially whichever one gets there first. And in that time, then each of these four will make calls like right away at the same time if your network connection is fast. And the router is smart enough to handle all four of those at the same happening at once and make it into a single HTTP call. which is super nice. It's a really cool thing. And if you don't want that behavior, you would just use HTTP link instead, which would basically do, what is it called? Link. Oh, I saw it earlier, but you would basically accomplish the same thing. HTTP link. Right.
Is that a reach to think that the batch link is the same thing as a switch map, or is it different?
No. As I understand it, and I'm not the expert on this by any stretch, but as I understand it, all it's doing is it's adding a little extra code to both the client and the server to handle the piecing together into a good payload multiple queries at the same time, and then deconstructing that payload on the server, taking the responses from those, putting them together, and then reconstructing them. Where I guess you could run into some issues, and you might not want to do this, is if one of those 4 queries you were making had a really slow turnaround time. Maybe you want to specifically run it through its own thing and run everything else through the batch. I'm not sure. I haven't run into that situation yet, but I like that the tools are there out of the box for you to play around with this stuff.
Nice. And last but not least, and I think you kind of brushed on this, like example with a mutation when we were looking at effects and stuff. So
yeah. I think we covered that. I saw that one pop up as we were going.
Okay. Yeah, I think when we went to the effect part, I think essentially, unless I understand mutation, I did not correctly, but I think
In the router here, specifically this mutation here, like I said before, it seems to me to mostly be a convention. It doesn't seem to do anything differently as a result, but it is more of a signal to your team to say, like, okay, when you're using this is going to be a mutation. So when you actually call it from your front end, you're forced to write not blah 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 dot query, but you actually have to write dot mutate. So you're saying, I'm going to change the data when I make this call, and that's good. That you do get that if you write http.get, but somehow when we use fetch and it's like stringified and it starts to be a little less, it doesn't feel quite the same as this for me. So I hope that's enough. I think we touched on that.
Yeah, yeah, that's perfect. So thank you so much again for, I would say, guys, this is actually like a webinar, but on top of it, people who wanted to do hands-on got the time to do that. And then, of course, we're going to be sharing the repo. And I think there's no better way to just find out about, not only a new concept, but why making that pick in the first place? Looking at an actual use case and what kind of problem it solves. And I think the way that you brought it, Evan, very smoothly, very you covered a lot in a little time. So God forbid we give you a whole day for you to go at it. So, and I hope that it happens pretty soon. So thank you so much for taking the time. And I even think that even the technical difficulties added a little bit to the charm of all of this. So once again, thank you. And where can people find you? What is the main way that people can connect with you?
If you want to reach out on Twitter for now until we all move over to whatever the new hotness is, feel free to do so. I will drop my my dev tree link in there, which kind of has a few things where you can follow up on. Feel free to check that out. I'm happily ticking away at my work, but if you have questions or you want to talk about stuff, definitely reach out.